that this is great. Oh, thank you. But I think that this is a really great way to think about it just a little bit in a broader way. I'm excited for our presenter today, Nicole. Nicole has worked with the Collaborative and across the state of Kentucky on many, many projects over the last several years. She's done adult learner process mapping or onboarding to enrollment process mapping with us, with NKU and Kentucky State. She's been involved in our basic needs ecosystem mapping work that's ongoing, and she's also our partner in looking at the student journey from adult education programs into our KCTCS institutions. So there are all sorts of different pieces of our puzzle that benefit from student journey mapping and process mapping. And hopefully, we'll get to learn a little bit about the behind the scenes, how we go about as those change leaders on campus to facilitate these processes. And then also thinking about it with your capstone hat on, what are some of the opportunities that you might have to help reveal a current state picture, which could maybe identify some really great opportunities for improvement and impact. Any other housekeeping, Stephanie, that you can think of?
Well, I know we have a live Google Doc where some folks had shared out their AIM statements and have also been responding to some comments in the live Google Doc. So hopefully that's still accessible for folks if you wanted to take a look at what other people are working on, how they're conceptualizing their project. If you want to share some feedback or encouragement to your peers, that is a great, kind of a great way to do so.
Thank you, Stephanie. Oh, perfect. Thank you, David, for putting that in the chat. Yeah, that was kind of our big outcome from the last module 3 on improvement science and our AIM statements. And so we're continuing to wordsmith and refine those. But, please, if you haven't thrown one into the Google Doc, feel free to do so. And then we'll be able to provide feedback. If you at any point in time would like to connect with me or Stephanie or one of our speakers and partners, we would love to make that happen too. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to turn it over so I don't take any more time from Nicole. Feel free to introduce yourself, and then if you need permissions to share screen, I will do that.
I will check that. Well, thank you so much, Lily, for inviting me here to talk to everybody, and for that, for sharing a bit about that story this morning, or earlier. It's not this morning because it depends on what state or part of the country you're in. For sharing your experience process mapping. I am beaming with pride in a way that one would think as a consultant that I wouldn't want everybody to know how to do what I do because it will put me out of work. But I truly believe that the only way that we can transform higher education is to build the capabilities and the capacity within institutions and organizations like the Collaborative. And I truly believe that, and I hope one day that I am out of work, and then I can go back into an institution and do this work. So it is, you just made my day. So I'm glad that you had such a positive experience as well. I'm going to share my screen. I do have a slide deck let's see. You'd think after all this time I would have this down pat. I'm always afraid of sharing my, whatever's on my, whatever's on my screen that's not the presentation. So I'm assuming you can all see the presentation slides. Yes? Okay, awesome. Thank you, David. It's good to see you. I think there's some familiar faces around. So let's see. Okay, so I'm going to go over an agenda really quickly, but before I do, if you are comfortable turning on your camera, you don't have to keep it on. I'm just going to ask you a few questions, and because I wasn't able to get a poll put together, I just want to see a show of hands. It will take just a few moments. And if you're not, you can also use the kind of the reaction buttons. So I am curious, who here has experience with any kind of mapping? A show of hands, just so it seems like a mixture. Great. Of those, You're going to be an soon, Lily. You're just going to be an expert at all. Who has experience with process? So those of you who do have experience with mapping, who has experience with process mapping? Okay, and then journey mapping. Okay, so we're a little bit split in between. Okay, just kind of helps me to understand the context, where we're kind of what level we're starting at. So I will definitely go into as much detail as possible in the time that we have. And so thank you for those who turned on your camera. And if you are more comfortable with it off, that is 100% fine. I am more comfortable with mine off, but unfortunately, that's just not going to happen. So we're gonna just really, we have a lot to cover today, and Lily and I kind of talked about this, and I know it's gonna be a lot of me talking at you, but I do want you to feel comfortable raising your hand and interrupting, or, there'll be moments of pause where we'll be able to kind of transition. Would like to definitely get questions as we go along instead of having to wait all the way till the end. We will have time for questions hopefully at the end as well. And then also if you're like me and you're like, I'm going to forget this, feel free to put them in chat and then I'll kind of pause and we can take a look at that. Or I can ask Lily to keep an eye on the chat and let me know, or Stephanie, and let me know if there's anything in there. So awesome. Okay, so we'll do some brief introductions. Then we're going to talk about kind of why mapping matters, and then also just a brief foundation. We're not going to dig into that too much, but we will do deep dives on both student journey mapping and process mapping, and then we will put them together. So we'll talk briefly about it is not as common as one would think to use them both in the same kind of projects. But since I started working with Kentucky and with Lily, we have been refining a process in which we do actually use both of them and have found them to be very useful. Now, I know that you are all working on improvement projects, and depending on the scope and focus of those projects, it might be that one is better than the other. And so it really is, you get to kind of like pick and choose and decide which is the best tool for you or both of them. So I definitely want to show you kind of, or go through what it looks like to use them both together. And then I just have a few examples, kind of how you could apply it to your work. So really briefly about me, I'm a principal with SOVA. SOVA is a founding partner and an ongoing implementation partner with the collaborative. One of our founders at SOVA is from Kentucky, and what happens in Kentucky higher education is very important to him. And working in Kentucky was my first foray into working at SOVA. So it's been kind of my main, I guess, one of my main clients since I started 3 years ago. So about me, I have worked both inside institutions as well as outside with at an association. My experience is very, very broad, which actually is really great for a consultant because I can come in and I don't need to be an expert at any one particular thing, but really do need to know the whole ecosystem of a university. I always like to say probably the thing that has benefited me the most is my start in institutional research. And so if you know data, a lot of times you know kind of how things operate within an institution because everybody wants that data and how it flows is really important. But other than that, I have mostly spent my, just by I want to say, like, nobody ever said to me like, oh, you have to go do improvement projects or you need to, focus on mapping or any of these things. It was just kind of in my nature to want to see things visually, which is how the mapping comes in, and then also to fix things. It's just kind of who I am and where I dig into. And so I had many different roles within the university that I worked with primarily, which is the University of Colorado, Denver, and would change every 2.5 years. When I finished one project, they picked me up and put me in another one, and so. Ended up in IT, which is a lot of times, and I don't know if it's the case with your institutions, but where a lot of this work happens, a lot of mapping happens. And so I'm just excited to now kind of have been take that out of IT and applying it mostly to student success initiatives. So a little bit about me, just so you know where I'm coming from and what my experience is. Oh, that was quick. Okay, so really briefly, some learning objectives. So we're gonna, hold on, my note. Give me 1 second because I need to change something because my notes are not coming up. So I apologize. I'm like, oh, I don't want you to see my head of my side of my head. Nope. Sorry, technical difficulties. Great. Give me a second. Sorry. Sorry about that, Lily. Ah, okay. I think we got this. It's not sharing anymore, right?
Correct.
Okay. It was there and then it wasn't there and okay. I think we're good now. Okay, so learning objectives. By the end of the session, you'll be able to, I hope, explain the value of the current state mapping and how it improves or it can be used to improve student experiences and institutional processes. Sorry, did someone say something? Was there a question? No, we're good. Distinguish between we're going to go look at two different maps in particular, two different mapping types. So distinguish between student journey mapping and process mapping. Identify components of both of those. They're pretty involved. And so we're going to go high level. What are the major components? Understand the process for creating both of those maps. So what are the steps that you would go through to do that? And then recognize both common challenges and best practices within mapping, and then being able to apply, I'm hoping, able to apply these mapping concepts to your own work. I don't expect you, this is a lot of information, and I don't expect you to become experts by the end of today. What I do hope is that you'll have a new vocabulary for how this works and how you can apply it to your work. There is a toolkit actually out there, and you also have information in your own toolkit, but there are videos that kind of go over a lot of what I've done that I had created for a different project within Kentucky, and I'm sure that Lily will share those with you. They're on the portal also as well that you all have access to, and I can't remember the
The
name
impact
exactly.
exchange. Yeah,
Thank you.
I can share those as well with the group.
Yeah, so if I was you, I'd be like, oh my God, I'm going to be drinking from the fire hose. But there are ways for you to kind of go in and find this information after the fact if you need kind of help. So I just want to make that clear. Thanks, Lily. So let's just talk about why mapping matters. If you've been in any presentations with me, you know this is a very common quote that I use, which is that higher education has traditionally built systems and processes for stakeholders. And when I say stakeholders, I'm actually talking not just, even though the second paragraph focuses on students, I want to make it clear that I'm not just talking about students, but this is students and staff and community, right? So we create them for people, and we need to shift towards designing experiences with them. And this is particularly true when it comes to students. And so the question then becomes, how do we do that? Right. And one of the ways that we've been working on doing that, we talk about having a student-centered or student-ready university. I'm sure that you have heard these words. I like to say that and I would say student-centered doesn't mean you do whatever the students want. It does mean that the environment is set up so that the students, so that barriers and kind of friction points are removed. And I think that that's what's really, as much as possible, I think that that's what's really important here, right? Is that we're making assumptions about how students should flow through, say, a process, as opposed to asking students how they are flowing through that process or how it could be improved. And I think that's where a lot of tension has come in. So I don't know why my slide deck is advancing without me, but gremlins in my computer apparently. So I guess we will move on to what is mapping. Really briefly, we're going to be focused on two different maps. As I will show you, there are many different types of maps. These are probably the two most commonly used in higher education, which are process maps. Well, I guess you can curriculum map as well, but from an operational side, process maps and journey maps. And you can see like there's those little iconish things at the bottom. Those are just really kind of high-level examples, and we'll dig into those more specifically in a bit. But process mapping, what you need to know to start is that it comes from the inside out. So it's about the university. It's about the operations and the tasks, the steps, the decisions that get made. So how you do something, right? Not how, and then on the opposite, a journey map is about how a student experiences what you do, right? So the registrar's office makes a decision about how they might do transfer articulation, right? They take steps. It might be very opaque to the student of how those steps, what those steps are and what those decision points are. And so that's your process, right? The process of what those steps are, how those decisions are made, handoffs, where it goes. On the other hand, the student journey map goes outside in. And so think about it as how the student would experience that transfer articulation process, which oftentimes is slow and confusing and, not having a lot of communication, right? So that's just from my experience of mapping those things. That is a common way that they are described by students. So again, process maps are biggest thing to take away from this is process maps are inside out and journey maps are outside in. So why does mapping matter? Like I said before, I think visualizations are a really good way for some people to be able to understand concepts or complex processes or steps or just any kind of complexity. But these aren't just kind of these nice visualizations that you do and you hang up on a wall and you're like, oh, this is great. Now I have it. And that's it. That's the end of it. But there really are strategic tools that can be used for improvement. They are not in themselves a decision-making. I wouldn't say that in themselves are a decision-making tool, right? So you're not going to use it and it's not going to give you the answer to all of your problems or what you need to fix. But what it will do is highlight and bring out certain insights and ideas that maybe you didn't see before. And so that in itself they're really, really valuable. And I do want to point out something that Lily said earlier, which is it's not just the maps themselves that are useful tools, but the process by which you create the maps is also extremely valuable. So I was trained in lean process improvement and have applied a lot of those in a program that was more geared towards government agencies. And so I've applied those to higher education, which has been great. And yet the person who developed this training now is doing this whole process through AI. And I recently talked to him and I said, so in a sense, you get a phone call from someone and they ask, a bot, and it asks you a bunch of questions and you answer it. And so then it maps it all out for you. And I pushed on that and I said, you know what? I don't know that would work. Like for what I do and what the benefits are that I'm seeing is that getting 30 people in a room together for a day. And I know people do not have a whole lot of time, even if it's just for a few hours. There are so many aha moments that happen that I think sometimes those are more valuable than even the maps at the end, right? Is building those connections between people or offices, departments that wouldn't normally kind of collaborate or talk. I've seen individuals identify duplicate efforts. They're like, I'm doing that. Wait, no, you're doing that. Like, why are we both doing that? Right. And so, but nobody would have known had you not been in together. So I think it's just to say that the mapping matters not just for the map itself, but for the process of mapping. And as Lily said, it's actually kind of fun. It's quite fun to do when all you have to do is just keep asking why, and you know, and what do you mean? And even if you know the process, you just act dumb and keep asking questions, which is really easy for me. So that is why mapping matters. And I think it is something that I would encourage everybody to do once or twice or more than that. Just really quickly, I want to focus not necessarily, you can read these slides, right? And I'll have them sent to you. There's the process maps and the journey maps, and these have their own benefits. But I think what's most important and what I'd like to focus on is why, what happens when you put them together, right? And so I do want to share that they really do help move I've been using a lot of them for student success work, right? So we do see that these maps do help with retention and completion because they help us identify barriers and obstacles to those, like what in onboard, like I've spent a lot of time mapping onboarding. So what in onboarding is happening that students might have a bad experience, which then affects their entire first year. It also helps to break down silos. Spoke in a bunch about that already, especially internally, and then really shifts towards a student-centered culture. And that comes a lot with the student journey maps, right? Is that you're always taking the perspective of a student, and we don't really get a chance a lot to kind of pause and to think like a student, or even to ask a student what they think about what they're going through. So, okay. And I know I'm talking really fast. And so if I am talking too fast for folks, I just want to make sure I get all this information to you. Just kind of wave at me and I'll try to slow down. So let's just deep dive into what student journey mapping is. So I am one who likes to know where something comes from. I tend to go down way too many rabbit holes of, of kind of the origin. So bear with me for a second as I give you a brief history of where journey mapping comes from. So journey mapping originated or was mostly used, kind of emerged in the 90s along with the internet and with e-commerce, and this idea that you have a user who goes through a process online, and how do you keep the individual engaged and kind of how do you make it as frictionless as possible so that the person buys whatever the good you're selling, right? So, and that's how it started, or how that, you know, what advertisement that you're going to be okay sitting through before you get to something. And so companies use journey mapping a lot when it comes to designing interfaces. There's a whole what's the word I'm looking for? Industry that kind of came up as a result of this called UX, which is user experience. I actually have a child who is studying cognitive science to do user experience research. That wasn't even a thing, I think, 20 years ago or 15 years ago. So it's quite interesting. But as higher education does, it tends to borrow from other industries, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad, not judging. I happen to think this one actually has been a valuable kind of borrowing. And so a journey map applied to higher education is what we call student journey mapping. It's nothing more than a journey map, and we just like to kind of claim it as our own. Early higher education use cases were around yield and retention rates primarily. So a lot of it, marketing and admissions, enrollment management would kind of started to use this in order to look across the full student life cycle and understand kind of where students were, like where where universities were capturing or colleges were capturing students and where they were losing them. So as far as when applied to student journey mapping itself, right, it is a visual representation of the student's interactions, experiences, and time at an institution. And given that I'm a visual person, I promise there will be, the next slide will give you some examples of what these look like. So bear with me for a second. As I said, student journey maps are a strategic tool. They help you to capture, understand, and assess students' interactions. They consider all different facets. So we like to say they're holistic, right? It's not just about the steps a student takes, but it's about how they feel. That's actually the most important part and also the most difficult part, right? Because we're a lot of times making assumptions, though we do ground these in student journey maps in data. But it is about, is a student frustrated? Are they upset? Are they, like where are they in an emotional journey through through the process that you are, or the kind of the path that they are going through. It is always, always, always student-centered. So it always takes the perspective of a student. One of the hardest things to do in terms of facilitating journey mapping is to kind of remember that yourself as a facilitator, and also to make sure that the individuals in the room are maintaining that student perspective. And there's other tools that we won't be looking at today because we don't have time, but that are in your book, I believe, that we provided you, which is empathy mapping. And that's a really important tool that we use prior to personas and empathy mapping. And we use those prior to journey mapping to get folks in the mindset of a student. And it's been, I have seen that to be very helpful. And then they're comprehensive. Like I said, they go beyond just process, and they're about emotions and touch point. And then they're adaptable. And so I do want to kind of hit on this point. Anything that I show you today, you don't need to it's not lock, stock, and barrel. Like, it's not you take that and it has to look like this. You have that ability to, your context, your university, and you should adjust it. What I have done over the year, I am constantly evolving these tools, and depending on what we're mapping, changing them for those reasons. I'm sure Lily could say that she's probably seen me never do this twice the same exact way. But I'm gonna show you kind of like the standard of like what's typical for these things, and then know that if it feels like too much, then just pick and choose what works for you. So these are examples of journey maps. And so, to the point of there's no exact way to do it, as you can see, these all look a little bit different. That bottom one, I would never recommend. It is a full student life cycle from a university in Australia, and I still don't understand how they did that because it is just so overwhelming. So I like to chunk out different sections. I'm doing journey maps right now for a university that are the full student life cycle. And I would think that they're very shallow, right? Like what you're able to get to, or, how deep you're able to get, is definitely different than, say, when we did onboarding at NKU or KSU, where we were able to really dig in. So it's really up to you and what the process calls for. This is the template that you should have access to, and that I have developed and used over time. I like to think of this more as a data collection map. And oftentimes when I come into work at a university, that is what they're asking for us to do, really, is to collect data, as opposed to these fancy visual tools that are more external facing. We do those too, but so I find this to be the most helpful, and we're going to go through each step. So just key benefits of student journey mapping. It helps you to understand the student perspective. And I apologize if I sound like a broken record, but this one, I'm going to say it over and over again. It is about the student, 100%. Allows you to optimize engagement strategies. So you would be able to look at this map and understand where maybe you can front load certain information or change communication flows in order to be able to prevent something that you're seeing happening downstream on the map. Allows for proactive problem solving, which is definitely related in the sense that we use persona, again, personas, I'm going to say those words. We're not going to go over them, but it is I have a brief slide just to kind of orient you to them. But personas are archetypes of students based in data. So not stereotypes. And in the sense of, it's not that every student is going to have the experience that you map out. And so you're able to kind of look at that and say, oh, this archetype has that experience. But if we actually, kind of are proactive, there's many students who aren't having this experience yet. And so we can change that and kind of help to make sure that that doesn't happen. We know that there's research that shows that the work through journey maps applied to improvement projects helps with retention and student success. I am quite interested in understanding, as we shift the definition of student success less towards graduation and retention towards outcomes, right, with regards to jobs and grad school. So what happens after you graduate? Whether or not this holds true. So I have not, we have not been using these enough within that context, but I'm excited to see how that applies. And I think it also, I think the other one was to improve, improves alignments. And so again, even though it's the student's perspective, a lot of times when people are going through them, it just brings up things around cross-organizational, cross-departmental work that is valuable. So these are what I would say the common components of a student journey map are. And so I would say most of them do at least collect data on all of these points, whether or not you see that information displayed in, say, maybe a more visual map. But they are a persona, which is a fictional but detailed representation of a specific student archetype. And I have a slide on what that is a little, we'll focus on that a little bit. And then stages are kind of the distinct steps that students or that along the journey. Again, those two we will dig into just briefly. So you have actions. So those are kind of what the student does during different things. So if we think about, let's see, orientation, right? And it's a school in which students register during orientation, then that's, student will meet with their advisor, student will register for classes, right? So those kinds of things are in terms of the actions. Touch points then go back to who at the university is the student interacting with, and not just who, but what. So I just mapped a process in which a student has to like log in to 6 different portals, right? There's no one entryway. So we know that that's a pain point, right? That the fact that, yeah, it's one login, but you have an LMS that they have to log into, and then they have, kind of a student portal, and then like a general student portal, and then parking passes is a different portal, right? And so every single time a student has to do something, they have to know where to go. So those are touch points as well. Mindset, this is where you get into how is the student feeling? And this is where empathy mapping and the persona drive this, right? So through the persona, we know kind of what the student's goals are, what they want to accomplish in kind of a larger scale. Then we know, if what is happening during that phase or that stage isn't necessarily what the student aligns with what the student needs or wants, we can infer kind of how the student is feeling about that. Pain points then come out of what exactly, if the student is upset about something or they're frustrated, what are the pain points that are causing that frustration? And then opportunities are specific to address pain points. So for every pain point, there should be, there must be, not must, but for every pain point, there should be an opportunity, if not more than one opportunity, right? So how can you address the what's causing the friction in order to improve the student experience. Then each map has goals, and like the student at each stage has a goal, and then an overall goal, which is more aligned with the persona. And we're going to kind of go through this in different ways so that you can you understand kind of where it all fits. So you can see this is a journey map, one more visual speaking. So here you can see where this is the persona. They actually have the information about the persona on top. And then their stages, which is discovery, preparation, coursework, internship, and final project. The touch points here, they've included both their touch points and their pain points together. These kind of these little markers of being able to identify like what the student's doing at that time. So like find housing and roommates, apply for a US visa. This is a foreign student. And you can see along the way kind of what those different points are. And they're using stars here to be kind of critical points along, like if you look at project management and you think about this is a project, then what are your kind of critical points along that that path of that have to like go well in order for, you know, the rest of the student's journey to continue. Then you'll see the mindset, and in here they're mapping the student's thoughts and feelings. So you'll say there's quotes about what the student feels like, which are always really helpful, I think, how they're feeling. And then these are the opportunities, and you can see they talk about it as possible solutions. So this is again, the template that I have provided you. It might look a little different. This is an earlier version. But I just want to kind of show you where all these show up here. So again, we put the name of the persona. I usually put the name of the persona and then a link to the actual persona, just because there's not a whole lot of information room on these maps. Then you have your overall, well, sorry, you have your stages. Let's go. Yeah. So here you'll have your stages, and you'll have to define those, and we'll talk about that. But if it was your full student life cycle, it might start at the point of applying to the university, and it might end at gets their first job or grad school, right? So that could be a very kind of wide, very, very wide journey. And then those stages are sections of that journey that make sense to you and the student and your university. Goals. So what does the student want or need to accomplish? So the goal itself is what the student wants or needs to accomplish during that stage. So if the stages applies to a university or college, then their goal is to complete an application, to send in their transcripts, right? So the goal is kind of the larger piece of that. So it's like complete an application on time. And then we'd get to actions. And so your actions would be pay the fee, pay the application fee if there is one, send in transcripts, get letters of recommendation, all the different pieces that would go into an application. Then touch points. So in this case, we'll kind of keep going on that example. Touch points would be the point of contact. So in that case, it would be whatever software or whatever application system the student is using, and maybe the admissions office if they had questions, or a chat bot or whatnot if they were going through that. Maybe it's their high school guidance counselor as well, or an adult education provider, navigator, helping them to apply to a college or a university after they've completed their GED. Then we can look at mindset, and that is, again, at this stage, what is the student feeling? So if the process was easy and they're excited, they've submitted an application and they're excited and they're happy. They also could be maybe a little anxious because they're worried about not getting in, right? So these are the kinds of things that you would capture here. Pain points and challenges. So if for example, the application wasn't intuitive, right? And where it's like, oh, send your transcript in, but it doesn't tell you how to send your transcript in, or there's no way to upload it once, after you've submitted your application, or you're not really sure how it, the way it's being communicated, that might be a pain point. And so you would just identify that there. And then from an opportunity, it could be, well, update the website or update the application to be more specific about how to do that. And so, or how to upload your transcripts or how to have them sent to the university. So this is another way to look at this. And for me, this is about kind of what are the questions associated with each one of these. And so overall goal is what's the primary objective that they want to achieve overall. So graduate, a lot of times it's just graduate with or finish, either graduate from a four-year institution, finish their associates, get a credential of value, transfer to a university, a four-year from a two-year. Those are all different kind of overall goals. Like I said, the goals themselves are specific to a stage. All of these pieces actually beyond the overall goal are specific to stages. And so when you look at a map, you would look at it across, but when you're filling it out, you're going down. So for each stage, you want to kind of fill that out. Let's see. So I just want to briefly kind of orient you to personas. And this is a sample persona. Actually, they all tend to look like this. It's a template that we've created that also is online in this toolkit we had developed. And so you can actually download the template. It's a PowerPoint template and use it. We also just recently developed an a guide to using AI to build personas. And so that also, I have to update that on the website, but that will also be available. So this is a sample persona. This is actually a fictional one that we created, but what you can see that there's just certain things that are common on personas, right? So you have a little bit of kind of bio demo data. You have a bit of a kind of narrative biography of like who the student is, what they're doing, what they want. And then I like to usually put goals, wants and needs and concerns. And these are very much specific to mapping to the journey map itself. The other thing that we sometimes see, and that depending on if communications is a part of this, is where they're getting their information from. So social media, professor, faculty, right? So that sometimes is very helpful in terms of if you're looking at communication flows. So student personas, like I said, is that they're a detailed profile, right? They're not a stereotype, although sometimes we fall into stereotypes, and that is it's a fine line. We just like to, I think the way to not fall into stereotypes is to make sure that they are grounded in data, right? So if some universities collect a lot of data on their students, a lot of times it's qualitative data that you need. Those focus groups that we all love to hold, or the surveys, those are great sources of data for personas. So if a university doesn't collect that data, a lot of times that would be the first thing that I would do with a university, would have them, we would either hold focus groups or send out surveys to whatever the population is. And that will then allow us to ground that in, not be as, kind of cautions us or kind of prevents us from moving towards, moving towards stereotypes. And it's not just about who, but also what and why. So as you can see, we also talk about like, what are their goals and why do they want, like, why are they pursuing these goals? And then why it's important is that it really does drive the entire mapping process. And we'll kind of go through that a little bit, but you would take this persona and say like this individual, like this person who's going to feel real by the time that you're done with it, right? What is the experience that they are having? So it's a very important part of journey mapping. And I'm sad that we won't be able to dive into the even deeper, but there is a lot of information online, both that I've created and other people have about personas. So kind of jump into stages. So I would say that personas and stages to me are the most important pieces of the journey map in terms of setting it up. And so the stages are, if the persona is what kind of drives the completion of the map, the stages kind of set the foundation. So stages are distinct chronological steps or a phase along the journey. And I give you some examples. So for instance, you have admission, enrollment, orientation, advising, class registration, right? So those would be stages along the point of probably like onboarding, right? And then kind of a more micro pathway would be kind of major declaration. Well, actually, this is just more on the, wouldn't be micro, it would just be the other side of the, so you're there and now you're engaged. So you declare your major, you're engaged in your program, you do a capstone, and then you graduate. Stages can be, depending on what your journey is, and a lot of times it's like you start, what do you start with and what do you end with? And then you figure it out in what comes in between. And there is no right or wrong. This is like very specific to both the student, both a student's journey, as well as how your institution kind of brings along that student through that particular journey that they're on. Just a few things about stages is that don't use institutional terminology, but don't use jargon, right? So we want to avoid, when we think about this as not from being from the student's perspective, that jargon oftentimes is not student centered. It's things that only, us who work within institutions know. But so we want to make sure that especially if it's ever kind of exposed to students to react to, that they're going to know what it is that you're talking about and not language that to them doesn't mean anything, like a lot of acronyms. I think Lily just said that, like, I didn't need to know their acronyms, and that is true, not to use that. And then also just balancing scope and complexity. You don't want to get too narrow in your stages, but you also don't want to get too wide. It's like a happy balance. I would say 5 or 6 maybe is max. I think I'm doing a journey map now with 7, and it feels very, that one extra feels very big. So we're not going to dive into these, but I just wanted to go over what the steps are for kind of going through the entire process of journey mapping. You would define purpose and scope like any project. Then you'd convene a core team. So this isn't a solitary singular effort. This involves people getting together. Identify other stakeholders that need to be involved, conduct research. That's what I was talking about in terms of surveys and focus groups, depending on who your audience or your personas should be. Develop the personas, identify the stages, which we just talked about. So in this case, I said 4 to 6. And then do your analysis and then map the student journey, which is what we think of when we like bring everybody together and do all the facilitation. So this is just to show you that part is like one section of all of this, right? There's a lot of stuff that goes in ahead of it and also after. As far as using the student journey maps, prioritizing opportunities would come next, and then developing action plans, and then track and iterate. We're not going to go into those because you are working with other folks and learning about driver diagrams and action plans. And this is just a tool that helps to move, helps with input to those items. So in terms of kind of effectively mapping the student journey, the current process, just start with purpose, base it on reality. So as I always like to say, to prioritize truth over storytelling. And that's where a facilitator is very helpful. because that question of like, but is that really it? Like, are you making that up, or is that really like, what is that grounded in? You can use both quantitative and qualitative data. Collaboration is key. This is like a co-created piece of, I'd say art sometimes, but a piece of, it's co-created data collection. Resist the urge to design, which means don't go straight to solutions. Even if you think you know how it should be fixed, you want to, going through the entire process is important. And then don't consider it one and done. So having, doing one student journey map at like one point in time means you have one student journey map at one point in time. Like once you make any kind of change as a result of that, it's going to be different, right? The next time you do it. And so it's constantly reiterating and learning about new things and new ways to test your assumptions about what students are experiencing. Just really briefly, missteps, just things to think about. Oversimplification is always a concern. Not going straight to students, not getting that data as well, making too many assumptions about what you think the student should experience or is experiencing. I would love to just do one of these where I get like a room full of students to do it, and I have yet to find a way to get that to happen, even with bribing and food. So a lot, so a lot of times I think we did cookies. The other day I had cookies on a campus and I was just handing them. I'm like, who wants cookies? And you just have to talk to me for 5 minutes. And, we'd just ask kind of questions about certain parts of their journey, and that worked really well. But it's hard to get students to commit to focus groups, no less a journey mapping process. Make sure that you're matching opportunities to pain points. So having pain points out there without thinking about how to address them, really, what was the point then, right? Of even identifying it just makes people frustrated. And then making sure that you're involving the right stakeholders so that for multiple reasons. One is for buy-in, but also for forward-leaning change efforts, right? So making sure that you have both leadership involved to know kind of like who has the authority to make decisions about what happens next. Learn this the hard way is that having that leadership commitment from the beginning is really important. We hit a lot of barriers with some change work that we were doing because that leadership knew about it, but they really weren't bought into it, and so I think that making sure that you have that is really critical, especially if change involves any kind of restructuring or money or pretty much anything. Yeah, so just this is Taylor and this is their student journey map, and I'm just going to really quickly go through kind of what we would do if I was facilitating this and how I would take this persona and build out a map. So this is Taylor, and these are pieces about Taylor's persona that I think are important. So they're a first-year student, they're first-gen low income, they're currently undeclared major, but interested in psychology. They want to learn more about career paths. This happened to be for a training around career stuff. And they want to graduate in 4 years. They want resources around mentorship for career exploration, internships within their field, and they're concerned about aligning their academic path with their future career goals or achieving the goal of graduating in 4 years and getting a well-paying job. So pretty typical things that students would be concerned about. So when we look at this, we're going to say, okay, so for Taylor, the stages are year 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? So that's really simply how we made the stages. And so in year 1, Taylor's goal is to explore classes of areas of interest to narrow down a major and a minor and adjust to college life, right? So they're undeclared, they need to figure out what it is they want to major in. The actions, they attend orientation, register and attend classes, meet with an advisor, join clubs, learn about different academic programs in case psychology isn't a good fit. So in terms of touch points, we have, they talk with their orientation leader, they attend orientation activities, meet with their first year advisor. They create a profile on Handshake. As you can see, it's both like people as well as systems and technology. Their mindset is that they feel lost, that they're not sure what they're doing, if they're doing it right, or even if their classes make sense. They don't feel like they're getting that feedback, and that they feel like they have to figure out everything on their own, and that their advisor is a general advisor and doesn't know anything about the psychology major. And so they're kind of upset, and that's their entry into the university. So as far as pain points, we identify the lack of information about the psychology major. The professional advisor isn't helpful. And in particular, this case, psych advisors won't meet with non-majors, right? So there's a particular pain point there that you can look at and say, well, that's, we'll see how that opportunity kind of comes into that. And then they feel like there's a lack of guidance. And so from an opportunity, it's really about making sure information about the department, including potential career pathways, are accessible to both majors and non-majors, right? So these aren't like, really difficult things to do. Sometimes it's like just simple changing of communications or making sure information is correct. And I will say by doing this, a lot of times people go, I didn't even know that information wasn't available to non-majors. It's just that simple task of mapping this current state, figuring out what the current state is, that like these things emerge as far as what people just made assumptions about, and that's not true. And so capturing it really does surface a lot of those issues. So if we were to continue this, you'll see, in this case, you did discovery year 1 and year 2, and you can see, where they are at different points. And you have examples of journey maps in your packet, I believe, and there's plenty of others that you can kind of dig into. So I just wanted to keep this in here, but in a sense, other people have dealt with, I know other folks have kind of gone over driver diagrams with all of you, but just like any improvement project, you use this to then drive, next steps or the way that you might approach a continuous improvement project. So look at it as kind of I think of it more as data collection in a longer or more in-depth process. So I'm just going to pause really briefly because that way I can have some water. And I just want to make sure if there was any questions. Yeah, so, okay. Any questions? This is the journey mapping is the more complex of the two. Process mapping is a little bit more straightforward. So we will get moving. So process mapping. This is how my introduction to mapping was through process mapping. And I think for most people it is. And what you think of as these little boxes and arrows that everybody that you see. So process mapping is a visual representation of a process or a workflow, and it shows the steps of the process, the sequence in which those steps take place, milestones, decision points, and other activities. I like to include on my maps kind of the people who are responsible for that particular step, as well as any systems that are used. Again, like journey mapping, you can change these to fit what is best for you. These are all the different ways that process maps can be used for. So training and onboarding, compliance and auditing, project management, process improvement, customer experience. I would say that the ones underlined here are those, so pretty much everything but compliance, risk, and resource are what I have used process mapping for and what I've seen them used for within higher education. So why do you process map? Similar to journey mapping, you're breaking down complexity. Process mapping oftentimes is used to increase efficiencies. So looking at the back end of how is something operating and how can you improve it, right? How can you maybe eliminate where is there steps that are duplicative, or where are you wasting time or energy or money? Improving communications and collaboration, identifying bottlenecks within a process, um, standardizing operations. Imagine having a process map so that when someone may leave, another person comes in and it is a roadmap for them about how to do their job. Those are things that we don't tend to do. And a lot of times there's a kind of steep learning curves when I think, a simple process map of how maybe someone goes through transfer articulation would be beneficial, right, to someone else who is coming in new without any background. And then it really does also help you manage change. In this case, it's the starting point, and then you have your ending point, and kind of looking through that roadmap of the changes that you have to make to get there. So why using process mapping in higher education? I think, again, a lot of people are visual thinkers, and so kind of pulling that information out and putting it in a visual format is very helpful. Just the process of pulling that information out of people and getting it on just written down, even if it wasn't in a visual format, is something that people have a hard time doing on their own, because you are so kind of entrenched in the work that you do that you don't really think about all the steps that you go through. And you need someone to say, okay, well, what comes next? Like, what actually do you do next, right? Like, in between this part and this part, what are the pieces that you do? It's like the only time I get to be really, really annoying in a meeting. So examples, streamline student services to enhance the experience, align academic and administrative processes to break down silos, governance around clarifying roles and decision points and approvals, and then commonly used for the implementation of new technology, which is, I think, where a lot of people have seen them used. These are all different, like I told you, like there are a lot of different types of mapping. I'm just so that if you've ever seen any of these, or you're like, oh, I've never seen it look like this, these are all different types of process maps. And again, you use whichever works best for you. These are the 4 that I tend to use most. And here's just some examples of process maps. So this one is of the student experience from awareness to enrollment. And this is to show you that they all look a little different. This is from Purdue University, and it is the process. It was their current process of a major, of changing their major. They fixed this quite a bit apparently after. This one is a part of Eastern Washington University's, goes from admitted through the 10th day. And it's pretty clean. Again, these are actually process maps that I've developed at my time at the University of Colorado, Denver. And you can see they all look different. Just depends on what the use case was and what I was creating it for. I'll point out this top one was like clearing academic. It was a process map for clearing academic flags for Starfish when we had implemented Starfish before. It's now, I guess, EAB Navigate, or somehow combined. So yeah, worked with advisors to figure that out. So in terms of how to process map, again, these are not like the 2 approaches are not that much different. You're defining a process, you're collecting data, you're mapping the process, you review and validate, and then you improve it. So we're going to kind of look at a few of these really quickly, and we're going to use a birthday party as an example. Sometimes we use like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but we'll do, or making coffee is another good one. So defining the process. So you want to identify the process you want to map, the boundaries of that process. Again, where do you start and where do you end? Always the 2 pieces that you want to do first. and then the purpose and objectives of this process. So in this case, it would be the planning and organization of a birthday party from the initial idea to the execution of the event. And so those are the boundaries, right? We decide to throw a party and the party ends, and you have to clean up. So those are the starting and the ending points. And then the purpose of the process was to have a fun and memorable event. So you want to kind of make sure that you've defined that before you start, or your process can get all over the place and you really won't, it won't be beneficial. So collecting data, right? So in this case, if we're gathering relevant data about our party, we need to think about past party planning experiences. We need to research online resources and then seek advice from friends and family members. So you can see how, you know, applying this to the work that you do, it would be to think about, you know, how you've experienced this as a person, you know, in your work, kind of asking other people, your colleagues, about how they experience it, just collecting different data points. As far as you document steps and sequences, and before you visualize it, right? There's this pre-worksheet that we use, and literally you just kind of dump, like a brain dump of like all the different things that you do for a process. And then you would collect additional data because you're only one person and likely not the only person going through this process. And then you map the process. And so this is what it would look like, right? So we've identified the steps. And so now we're mapping it. You decide to throw a party, you choose a theme, you create a guest list, you send out invitations, you plan the menu, book the entertainment, prepare party favors, decorate, set up food and drinks, welcome guests, and enjoy the party. Simple, right? We know that our processes within the institution are not this simple, but I think it's meant to give you a kind of overview of what of how you would approach mapping a process. Again, like I said, there's no wrong or right way of doing this. Just the act of getting the information out and putting it in a visual format is in itself really valuable. And really understanding that current state so you can figure out where you want to go is super important as well. Now the fun part. And so putting them together. Like I said, this is typically people do one or the other. And they're not usually combined. I find them, I've had projects where I have done one or the other, and I always feel like I'm missing something, right? Where I don't have both. There are going to be in cases, and some of you might have them, where really one or the other is more relevant, and that's fine. I just like to know both inside out and outside in. I think that they're complementary, and I think they enhance and kind of feed off of one another in a way to create more nuance and richer information. So why do they both matter? And I think it's key to say that you can map institutional processes and overlay them on a student journey map, and it will tell you where that process is causing pain, like pain points for the student, and how much better it is to then know that so you can prioritize and identify actual like processes in the back end to address student pain points. Kind of aha moments where you're like, oh, we did this because it was easier for us, but it causes the student to have to go to 3 different offices and make 5 phone calls. Maybe not a great experience, but would you have noticed that if you hadn't talked to students and figured out that that was what they were doing, and this is the back end, right? So when you put them together, you're able to identify, just more narrowly identify some of the things that are causing the pain. It allows you to focus where improvement efforts should be, how to align operations with student needs. And so as you go through a journey map, you know that a student needs to register for classes, but the student can't register for classes because they have a hold before they see their advisor, but there's no advising appointments. This is not unusual, right? And so what do you do, right? But it's that question of how do you align the operations with those student needs of needing to register, and yet the operations, the back end, is not giving them doesn't give the student the opportunity to be able to. It stops the student from being able to do what it needs to do. And then it also, again, looks at cross-functional coordination. So the idea that, we always say like, oh, you just throw it over the wall, right? So admissions, registrar, bursar, right? Like there are things that happen. Now we use technology and it's in the back end and nobody thinks about it, right? But this way it would make you think about it. Like, why is that happening here? And is there a kind of feedback loop, or is there not a feedback loop? And those are going to be important pieces to a process. So which approach to use and when? So use journey mapping when you need to understand student perspective. Need to understand kind of emotional reactions, like why are students so angry about this particular thing? It's good to dive in, build empathy, and then find gaps between what a student expects and what their actual experience is. And process mapping, you want to look at, you want to use when you want to know the kind of steps and workflows that are going through the institution. If you're being asked to do more with less and you want to improve institutional efficiencies or budget cuts that you need to find, cost savings, process mapping is definitely the way to go. Also in terms of standardizing and streamlining things across the university. So use both when you are kind of trying to address student-facing problems, because the experience of a student doesn't happen because there's something behind that experience that the student is having, and it's typically the university's processes that are causing it. Not always. There's external kind of factors as well, but a lot of it could be alleviated by looking at our internal processes. But first, you need to know where those pain points are. I think one piece of important information about this, working with these together and the current state, is that you can more quickly get to the root cause, right? Like you can more quickly say, here's this pain point, what's causing it, instead of making assumptions or having to go back and do more digging or more data. Both of those things combined, process maps and student journey maps, really help you to identify some of the root causes or the root causes. Examples, enrollment journey plus an enrollment process. You would want to understand the student experience and operational workflow, advising journey and advising process, what students experience and how advising works. I mean, it's pretty simple when you think about it, I guess, but oftentimes not done. And then reentry journey and comeback process. So understanding how returning students come back to a university or college, and that support process. So what are the steps that they take? What happens in the university to bring that student back, right, within the registrar's office, and kind of re-engaging versus what the student's experience is. So like any improvement cycle, and again, I put this here because I think it connects to some of the other work that you are doing or will be doing, which is you map, prioritize, plan, act, monitor, and repeat. It's just a cycle. It's just like any continuous improvement, but mapping is oftentimes an early on process or activity that helps you really to kind of get a basis for where you are. And just remember, I put these exclamation points so I wouldn't forget to point this out. Maps are a tool, right? They are not the end in themselves. You do not do a map and then say, oh, we're done. They are just information that is used to make better decisions. So just really briefly, because I know that we're running out of time, I just put together a few examples of how this could apply to your work. And I do believe that some of these aims are maybe familiar. And so I think I used 3. but increase the number of adult ed students who enroll in post-secondary institutions, right? So would you use a journey map or a process map? Journey map you would use to understand the adult learner's enrollment journey, so the experience that they have. You'd use a process map to understand the enrollment process that the steps the university takes to enroll that student. In this case, you start with a journey map because you want to understand the student's experience before understanding the processes. The student's experience in this case should drive what the processes, like the negative or positive experiences of the student should drive what those processes in the back end look like. It's not about the convenience of the institution. I mean, we don't want to make it harder for people. Like we don't want to like add steps and make it really more complicated, but oftentimes we've overcomplicated things to the point where it's convoluted and the student can't see. It's very opaque. Let's put it that way. We hear a lot about kind of, I don't understand. It's not transparent. So in that case, I would suggest that. Comeback cards retention. So retain 85% of students returning after 2 years away. So what's the returning student experience would be the journey map, but the process map would be how does debt forgiveness or re-enrollment process work? These are, could be that, I guess. And in this case, you would look at both, right? So I think in all cases, both work, but you always have to have a starting point. And then disability service connection. So create a connection between admissions and disability services. The journey would be the student's path to accessing services, and the process map would be the current referral or handoff process. In this case, I would start with process because it's making an assumption that it's kind of a broken handoff, right? Like something's getting lost in translation or it's not getting to where it needs to be when it needs to be there. Now, mind you, I made assumptions on these to provide examples. And so those assumptions could obviously have been wrong about where you're going with that, if that is yours. So, and that is how to process map and journey map in 90 minutes.
Thank you, Nicole. One thing that I was also thinking while you were sharing all of that information was a little bit of okay, so how do I facilitate this? Because the end products that you shared are very beautiful and very, nice and everything, but a little bit of, how the sausage gets made is also, a very fun part, I think. And so we talked a lot about as the facilitator, you want to convene the right stakeholders to be in the room who are really going to be able to talk about the experience, whether it's from the student perspective and you've got some personas that are really guiding you, or it's from your administrative process perspective and you've got all the people in the room that have their hands in in making the cake or whatever. Now I'll just share a little bit because we were just at, Nicole, is it okay if I share screen?
Yeah. Let me, can you boot me off or do you need me to stop sharing first?
If you don't mind, just,
Hold on.
I'll probably boot you, I don't know.
No, good. We're good.
Okay.
And
So,
thank you, Lily, for bringing that up. We get so close to it. It's like the facilitation part is like, you forget that that's like a thing sometimes.
it is. And, just doing it myself for the first time yesterday, I wasn't exactly sure how it was going to flow when I got into the room. I knew that from the facilitation guide and the toolkit that, okay, these are the big steps in the process. And I've seen you do it before. And so I knew big sticky notes would be essential to this process. But really we created the boundaries around the process because from the start of their application of emergency aid through when the funds were dispersed, and we have a case closed. So that was our very finite process. And then from the website where the institution shared, here are the steps in our process. They had 4 steps. They said, you apply, we will award you. You, you have to meet with us, then you'll get your money. And actually, maybe it was only 3 steps. So, and then we start talking and it's kind of like, okay, well, first when they apply, then what happens? Okay, the application is in Slate, so Slate automatically generates an email to so-and-so. Okay, so-and-so gets the email. Then what do they do? Okay,
Right.
well, then they look up that student in Slate and checks for some basic eligibility criteria. Okay, if the student is eligible, now you've got a decision point. So this is actually our next glance at what all of those sticky notes came together to create. And you've got a decision point of, okay, do I meet with this student because I need to learn more and give them an award decision, or are they not eligible and I need to communicate? So it was just, I just wanted to share like the sticky note process because that is what you would actually, the most important part of your time there would be bringing the sticky notes and the markers, having the big, like, these are the big things that we say is our process on the wall, and then asking your team to fill in all of the miniature steps in the process. And we did start with a student, a student kind of persona to ground us in a case, like a real student case. And it was a simple case because we know they're not all, there's probably multiple ways that this happens depending on how complex the case is. But it was just really, it was really great to center the student, but then to go through the administrative process with the right people in the room. And then after that, then as the facilitator, you would go back and take all of those notes and think through, okay, plotting it. I used Miro, which is just a really easy tool to create that visual of a process map. The only other thing I wanted to share was, what was it? Question.
I just wanted to add, like, one of the things is that, Lily has seen me do this. And so it's like the process that I use, and I have seen other people do it. But over time, you're going to see what feels right for you, like what makes most sense for you, right? I don't, if sticky notes are not your thing, there's other, there's find other creative ways to be able to pull that information out. There's a lot, you can do it, directly on Miro, for example, or Mural, right? So, or whiteboard or any of that stuff. So, and not Lily, I'm thrilled that you like that process, because I do too, and that's what what you've seen me do. But at the same time, I also, one thing that I want you all to leave with is that these are tools that can be adjusted and kind of changed to serve what you need best.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Nicole. Because, we were trying to explore, well, what other ways could this work? Well, we need to do small groups. Everyone maps their own perspective of the process, and then we kind of compare out, to see if we have some consistency. But it was a small enough group that just, the open discussion was really was helpful for this process. I would love to know if, as you are looking at your aim statements and your kind of focus areas, where do you possibly see a tool? What tools are you considering to map your current state picture?
Well, for us, we need the student journey map. I mean, I think that is like essential. We're the adult education transition. Without that, it just doesn't matter. So that one is extremely important, and that's really where we want to start. I mean, we have an idea and all kinds of things, but if we don't actually get to talk to the students and have a focus group and understand exactly where they're coming from and what their hurdles are, it's just not going to work.
Thank you, Pasha.
Asha, to add to that, I want to make sure that we have a conversation with those people who are successful in transitioning from adult ed to post-secondary, but then also some people who are not
Good.
successful, who maybe had it on their agenda and then weren't able to get there for some reason or other, so that we know not just, what went right, but what didn't.
It's a very good point.
Well, I know that we're getting close to the end, but don't worry. I put in the chat the feedback form. I'll send this to in an email as well. Really, really appreciate your feedback and opportunities for improvement. We'll meet again in 2 weeks. Let's see, it is the 19th of November at 2 p.m. Eastern. And if you can just kind of have thought a little bit about how you intend to map your current state picture, that's what we'll kind of bring into the community of practice. We'll get a refresher of this content from Nicole. We'll go into small groups. We'll think things through, help each other out, come back, share out, get feedback again, and continue to move forward. Do not hesitate to, I know we're getting a little deeper and deeper into this. Do not hesitate to reach out or just email me or Stephanie if you want to brainstorm, if you want to think through your project or your aim statement some more, or some ways to process map or current state picture map, whatever the case may be. All right, well, thank you all so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Oh, anything else, Nicole?
Oh, no, just that I tried to answer some of the questions in chat, and I'll stick around for a few minutes if anybody wants to ask questions. But also I put my email in there, and I'm happy to just if you need kind of guidance or anything in the next 2 weeks before we meet again. Happy to help.